The biggest challenge staring at the government in this union budget is revival of demand for India's residential sector. And a big part of that is to restore confidence by giving stuck home buyers some resolution. At the last count, according to Prop Equity data, there were 1,400 plus stuck projects across India, which on an average are delayed by 53 months. Now, these fed-up home buyers are clamoring for a stress fund by the government in this budget for all such projects to be completed. I caught up with the Housing and Urban Affairs Secretary, Durga Shankar Mishra, who told me that such a fund is under consideration by the Department of Financial Services for projects which need last-mile funding and are about 90% completed.
Well, I'm not competent to give any comment on this, whether it will be part of the budget, not part of the budget. I can only mention that when a committee was constituted under my chairmanship, for addressing the issue of such state projects in Noida, Greater Noida and Jamuna Expressway, we examined various aspects. What has led to these projects to be in a position where they are yet not complete, they have not been given to the home buyers who have invested their lifetime savings and all. Among various other recommendations, one of the recommendations was to create such kind of a short-term fund, so that if you give this last mile requirement of a small budget, a small fund, so then in that case such projects which are stalled, they could become complete, they could be completed, or at least whatever was stalling that will stop, and even the home buyers will start making payment. This is not only in the real estate sector, but also in other sectors also. There are state projects. We have discussed with the Department of Financial Services and also with the banks, the regulators, various people we have discussed in different forums. And we have been told that there is a discussion going on to create such a fund which will provide financial assistance for a short term, so that such stalled projects, they could be move out of that and they can become part of the economy.
Let's also listen into K.K. Mistry, VC and CEO of HDFC, who also has been pushing for a stress fund by the government and told us that it can definitely work in partnership with the private sector. Here's how.
If you want to look at what is to be done with the stuck projects, I think there are two possible solutions for that. The first is that maybe a fund needs to be created. Maybe in the budget you could set up a fund with 1,000 or 2,000 crore investment by the government, where you can bring in private sector investment also, and then together you have a fund size of 3,000-4,000 crores, which can then be looked at, which can then look at these stuck real estate projects and see how these projects can be revived, move the developer away, get a stronger developer to come and complete the project. And the second thing which needs to be done is some regulatory benefit needs to be given to the real estate sector. There is a lot of hesitation to lend money to the real estate sector because we have a very strong or a very I would say a very strong regulatory environment.
Well, the demand for the home buyers is to set up a fund of 10,000 crores, but I don't think the government will come out with that number. As we just heard K.K. Mistry saying that a fund of about 4,000 to 5,000 crore in partnership with the private sector, if that comes through, it will give home buyers hope of a resolution. But how does one actually ensure that such a fund achieves project completion and does not become mere optics like the entire NBCC saga, which was projected by the government as a company which is a knight in shining armor, but achieved actually nothing either in the Amrapali case or in the JP case? Let's get in the experts to answer that. MS Money partner Deloitte India joins us. We also have with us Pankaj Bajaj, MD Eldeco, and with us Gulam Zia, Executive Director, Advisory, Retail and Hospitality, Knight Frank India. We also have with us here in the Delhi studio Sunil Tyagi, co-founder and senior partner, ZS Law. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me. My first question is to the lawyer here. Sunil Tyagi, can a stress fund of this kind work for last mile funding? What are the legal implications of it?
So definitely, Manisha, this kind of a fund will really help the projects which are stuck. But as I hear from you and the speakers, it's only for the initially 90% projects which are 90% complete. This will definitely help. This may require kind of some legislative backing also. So we have to see who will set up this fund, who will fund this fund, what will be the object of the fund, and who will manage this fund. And whether we will again involve NBCC or we will ask the developer to complete the project or buyers associations. So there are 3-4 things, but first necessary is the commitment to set up this fund. Once this is set up, I'm sure there will be 3-4 things which we have to take care, which can easily be taken care of, and look at the completion of the project.
So you're saying that let's start at least with a stress fund.
Yes.
Mr. Mani, come in here. How will the government decide, like Sunil also says, which projects will get the money from the stress fund? Should the start be, as the Secretary said, 90% completed, which only lead last mile funding? How will the government explain it to other home buyers whose projects probably haven't started or are only 50% completed?
Look, I think there are different ways of doing this. One way is we already have a definition of 90% completion, as you just said. In addition, very interestingly, in GST, we also have this concept of an occupation certificate having been granted. And bear in mind, there are certain projects where the occupation certificate has been granted, but where still you are not able to do the finishing, you are not able to get it completed in time. Now, at a broad level, my take would be that most of the tax impediments which were there in respect of these projects have already been taken away. Now it's more an issue in respect of how to arrange the remaining working capital so that we go ahead and start working on these projects all over again.
Pankaj Bajaj, so Mr. K.K. Mistry said on our channel that the government should bring in about 1,000 to 2,000 crore, and I think if we do see a number in the budget, it's likely to be around that figure. The rest can be brought in through private investments, and a strong developer can revive and complete stuck projects. We've had a conversation earlier as well. On paper, this sounds like a perfect solution, but why will private investment come in? Why will a private developer come in without any expectations of a return?
First of all, Manisha, I don't think, sorry to go with the popular flow here, I don't think a 2,000 or 3,000 or even a 10,000 crore stress fund is the answer to the woes of the sector. I mean, Amrapali itself, the case which gets, the figure which gets quoted in the media is about 7,000 crores, that we need that kind of money to turn around the Amrapali projects. So, I mean, 2,000 or 3,000 crores is a joke. What we don't need a stress fund. What we need is a mechanism to ensure that the funding which comes in at this time is superior to any other funding, and therein lies the legislative catch. So RERA and IBC and Consumer Forum, there is a conflict amongst all these legislations. If there are enough funds floating around even today, they are willing to fund, but what they don't want to do is to get stuck in the quagmire of multiple claimants. If the project, every project has a risk. So they want to be superior to everybody else. What we need is a mechanism for last in, first out kind of funding, LIFO kind of funding. The stress fund is probably a mechanism for that. But a stress fund of 2,000-3,000 or even 10,000 crore rupees is not going to cut it. So similarly, if an investor or a developer comes in now, he would need to say, he would say that I am coming in now when the project is at this dire precarious stage. I need to be secured and I need to be first out. I am going to be superior to everybody else. So that's the mechanism, and that mechanism is not there in RERA. It's not there in IBC, because as soon as if something happens to that project or that company, you're pari passu with everybody else. So why would anybody come in? It's not a question of 2,000 or 10,000 crore rupees. It's a question of making these kind of investments superior to every other investments. And for there, I think we need multiple interventions at the legislative level.
All right, multiple interventions at the legislative level and a resolution mechanism. A fund alone will not cut it. Forget the amount. We don't know what's working in the finance ministry. Ghulam Zia, what would you agree with? What would you disagree with?
Well, I would agree with most of what we're talking about, but then I would also agree with the concern that where is the solution? Because in spite of all that, if a developer is still not finding lucrative to enter into these projects and complete it, then what? Because we've already seen this question, coming back at us time and again. So to me, perhaps you have to find some different way of addressing this problem. And since we are more concerned about execution, because most of these projects are beyond marketing risk or financing risk, etc., or even for that matter with government coming in, even your legislative risks or permissions, etc., are also in place. So what is the key here is to complete those projects. It's about execution, finishing whatever is remaining to be completed. And for which I think we need to explore something else. We have seen this in governments time and again, where they don't find private players to come in and pick up a project, for whether it is for infrastructure or otherwise. Then there is this mechanism of EPC coming in. And an EPC contractor, and then we have huge number of them on private sector as well, who can come in as EPC contractors. And with a proper program management approach, I believe that it can still be delivered. Because, ultimately, if you're looking at what percentage there is for a developer to take away, let's look at it. What is it that the developer is bringing on table? His marketing expertise, his financing expertise, his ability to manage the permissions. But if all that is taken care of, the only thing remaining is execution. So why don't we look at EPC model and bring in proper program managers to actually ensure that it is completed in time? I believe that is what must be looked at.
That's a very interesting idea as well. Sunil Tyagi, would you agree with it? I mean, why would a strong developer take on the immense headache of fighting zillion cases slapped on him by maybe RERA or IBC or everything else which is there out there? Just bring in an EPC, set up the stress fund, but bring in some strong EPCs, last in, first out. Will that model work?
That can work, but Manisha, I'm not sure whether the fund will look at some return out of that income, the fund they are investing in. I think the object of the fund should only be to bail out the projects, not to look at the returns at that stage. And the fund then can invest, and the question would be whatever is the receivable from the project and whatever is the cost of construction. If the cost of construction is higher than the receivables, then how will you recover that money? So at this stage, we should only focus on that, not on the investment, on the return, whatever is the fund's income.
All right.
Not at that.
Mr. Mani, would you agree with it that irrespective of what happens, if there are projects where there is no juice left at all, there's no land to be monetized, there are no, let's say, assets to be monetized in terms of unsold inventory, and even if you do have that, you will have banks and NBFCs which have lent against these assets standing in queue first. So isn't most critical the fact that the government has to prioritize home buyers as the #1 receivers of any dole out?
Absolutely. In whatever we do and whatever solution is found out, it is very clear that the home buyer has to be central to the solution and should not be part of the periphery. And I think it's a very good point that is being made to say that at the end of the day, there has to be something in it for everybody. It has to be a win-win for everyone. Because if it's not a win-win for everyone, why should anyone, risk investing in a project? And as I mentioned before, we are discussing this in a situation where many of the complaints that people had with respect to the high rates of GST on real estate projects seem to have been taken care of. We have a very attractive rate now of 5% and 1%, which exists for the sector as a whole. And bear in mind that if these projects are, close to completion or almost at an occupancy certificate stage, there is no GST at all on this as far as the home buyer is concerned. So therefore, any solution that is worked out, the tax concern seems to be taken care of. GST rates have been brought down. Input tax credit is available in certain situations to the developer. Now, what needs to be done is to look at the viability of these projects all over again. And if these are viable, then make it a win-win-win for everyone.
Win-win-win for everyone. But can this work without home buyers becoming more rational in their demands and understanding what is it that they actually want from that stress fund that the government will set up? We'll come back and discuss that.